In the summer of 678 AD, an Arab fleet assembled in the Sea of Marmara and advanced on Constantinople. It was the largest naval force the Umayyad Caliphate had ever committed to a single operation, hundreds of warships, thousands of men, the concentrated military power of an empire that had conquered Persia, Egypt, North Africa, and most of the Near East in the space of a single generation. The Byzantine Empire, exhausted by decades of war on multiple fronts, had watched its territory shrink to a remnant centered on the city. If Constantinople fell, Byzantium ended. If Byzantium ended, the entire eastern Mediterranean became part of the Islamic world within a generation. The Arab fleet burned. Not all at once, not from a single source, but repeatedly, systematically, over the course of the campaign, ships catching fire in ways that made no sense to the men experiencing it. The fire fell on them from tubes mounted on Byzantine vessels, and it burned on the surface of the water itself. They threw water on it and the fire intensified. They tried to scrape the burning liquid off the hulls with tools and it spread. Men who jumped into the sea to escape the flames found that the fire followed them. The fleet retreated. Constantinople survived. The Byzantine Empire continued for another 8 centuries. The weapon that did this was called, eventually, Greek fire. Its formula was the most closely guarded secret in the history of military technology, more carefully protected than the atom bomb, more successfully kept than any state secret of the modern era. 1100 years after its invention, we still do not know precisely what it was. Kallinikos and a gift from God. The origin story of Greek fire is specific enough to be plausible and vague enough to invite questions. Ancient sources credit the invention to a man named Kallinikos, or Kallinikos, described as an architect or engineer from Heliopolis in Syria, who had fled the Arab conquest of his city and brought his knowledge to Constantinople sometime around 668 to 672 AD. He offered his invention to the Byzantine Emperor Constantine IV, who recognized its military potential and commissioned its development and deployment. Whether Kallinikos invented the formula from scratch or assembled it from existing knowledge, perhaps combining his understanding of Syrian petroleum distillation with earlier Byzantine experiments in incendiary compounds, is not clear from the sources. What is clear is that within a few years of his arrival in Constantinople, the Byzantine navy was deploying a genuinely novel weapon that their enemies had never encountered and could not counter. The Byzantine court treated the formula as a divine gift. Imperial chronicles describe it as something revealed by God for the protection of the Christian empire, entrusted to the emperor personally, not to be shared with allies or sold to foreigners under any circumstances. This theological framing was not merely rhetorical, it was a security protocol. The formula was restricted to a specific family of craftsmen, perhaps the descendants of Kallinikos himself, whose monopoly on its production was enforced by the imperial court. The emperor himself reportedly swore to God that he would never reveal the secret. The penalty for disclosure was death, and in at least some accounts, damnation. The Siege of Constantinople, 674 to 678. The Arab sieges of Constantinople, there were 2 sustained attempts, in 674 to 678 and again in 717 to 718, were among the most consequential military campaigns of the early medieval period. The Umayyad Caliphate under Muawiyah I had established a forward base on the Cyzicus Peninsula in the Sea of Marmara and mounted annual summer campaigns against the city's sea walls, probing for weaknesses, attempting to blockade the harbor, looking for the opportunity to land a significant force. The Byzantines had the advantage of the Theodosian walls, triple-layered fortifications that had resisted every previous attacker and would continue to do so for 8 more centuries. But the sea walls were more vulnerable, and the Arab fleet was large enough to threaten them. The breakthrough came when Byzantine fire ships, vessels equipped with the new incendiary weapon, mounted in siphon tubes at the prow, engaged the Arab fleet in the harbor. The specific mechanics of the engagement are not fully described in the sources, but the outcome is consistent across all accounts: catastrophic Arab losses, primarily by fire. The fleet that retreated in 678 was destroyed further by storms on the return journey. The Arab land army, which had been campaigning in Anatolia simultaneously, was defeated. Muawiyah sued for peace and paid tribute to Constantinople for 30 years. The threat to Byzantium's existence was lifted, and the frontier stabilized for a generation. The 717–718 siege was even larger. Arab sources suggest fleets of 1,800 ships, though modern historians consider this an exaggeration. And the Greek fire was again decisive. The Bulgarian Khan Turbil, allied with Byzantium, attacked the Arab land forces from the rear, and between the fire on the water and the pressure on the land, the Arab campaign collapsed. The Caliph Suleiman died during the siege, possibly of illness brought on by the campaign's conditions. The second great Arab attempt on Constantinople failed as completely as the first. Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, argued that the failure of these sieges was one of the pivotal moments in world history, that if Constantinople had fallen to the Arabs in the 7th century, the subsequent Islamization of Europe would have been a real possibility, and the civilization that produced the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment might not have developed as it did. The Greek fire that burned those Arab fleets was, in this reading, one of the decisive weapons in the shaping of the modern world. How it was deployed, the siphon and the ship. The delivery system for Greek fire is better documented than the formula itself, primarily because it was visible to observers on both sides and described in Byzantine military manuals that have survived. The primary method was the siphon. A metal tube mounted on the prow of a specialized vessel called a dromon, or on platforms built onto larger ships. The liquid was pressurized, apparently by a pump or bellows mechanism, and projected as a stream of burning fluid toward enemy vessels. Byzantine military manuals from the 10th century, including the Tactica of Emperor Leo VI and the anonymous De Rebus Bellicis, describe the siphon system in general terms while deliberately omitting technical specifics. They note that the fire must be projected downwind, that the operator requires protection from the heat and flame, and that the system requires significant preparation and maintenance. The range of the siphon is not specified, but based on the tactical descriptions, it was probably effective at distances of 20 to 30 meters, close enough to require the Byzantine ship to approach the enemy vessel, but far enough to prevent immediate boarding. Secondary delivery methods included hand-thrown ceramic pots or grenades filled with the incendiary liquid, precursors to the modern grenade, and catapult-launched containers that would shatter on impact and ignite. These smaller-scale versions were used in both naval and land engagements, and were less spectacular but arguably more flexible than the siphon. Accounts of the Crusades mention Byzantine forces deploying what sounds like Greek fire against both Islamic armies and, in one notorious incident, Crusader forces who had become inconvenient allies. The theft attempts and the security failures. For a secret so carefully guarded, Greek fire inspired a remarkable number of attempts at espionage, theft, and reverse engineering. The historical record preserves several of these, and the pattern they reveal says something interesting about both the secret's value and the limits of even the most sophisticated security arrangements. The most famous attempt was by the Bulgarian Khan Krum in the early 9th century, who reportedly offered enormous sums for the formula after his military campaigns brought him into contact with Byzantine incendiary weapons. The Byzantines declined. Whether any technical information leaked through diplomatic channels or through the observation of deployed weapons is not known, but there is no evidence that Bulgaria ever successfully replicated the weapon. The Arab military, having faced Greek fire at Constantinople and in other engagements, made sustained efforts to understand and reproduce it. Arab chemists of the 8th and 9th centuries, working within the tradition of systematic inquiry that produced some of the most significant scientific advances of the early medieval period, wrote about incendiary compounds and experimented with petroleum-based fire. Some of their formulas, preserved in Arabic manuscripts, contain ingredients that overlap with the proposed constituents of Greek fire. Whether these represent independent discovery, partial information obtained through espionage, or observation of captured or leaked material is impossible to determine. The most dramatic security failure occurred in 1210, when Byzantine sources record that the secret was sold to the Saracens by a treacherous official. The identity of this official, the price paid, and the completeness of the information transferred are all unclear. What is clear is that by the time of the Crusades, various parties in the eastern Mediterranean were deploying incendiary weapons that they called Greek fire, and that these weapons had varying properties. Some burned on water, some did not, suggesting that what was circulating was partial information, perhaps a version of the formula without the key ingredient or ingredients that gave the original its most extraordinary properties. What was it? The chemical puzzle. The most important surviving description of Greek fire's properties comes from the Byzantine historian Anna Komnene, writing in the 12th century. She describes it as a liquid that ignites on contact with water, that burns with a roaring noise, that cannot be extinguished by water but can be smothered with sand, vinegar, or urine. Earlier sources add that it produces thick black smoke, that it clings to surfaces, that it can be projected as a stream, and that it continues burning even when submerged. Modern chemists and historians of science have proposed several reconstructions, none of which is universally accepted. The most straightforward is that Greek fire was a form of naphtha, crude petroleum. Perhaps thickened with resin or quicklime to make it adhere to surfaces and to prevent it from dispersing too quickly when projected. Naphtha burns on water, produces black smoke, and ignites readily. The addition of quicklime, which reacts exothermically with water, might explain the reports that water intensified the fire, not because the fire itself grew stronger, but because the quicklime's reaction with water produced additional heat that reignited the naphtha. This reconstruction is chemically plausible and consistent with what was available in the Byzantine world. A more sophisticated theory adds calcium phosphide, a compound that ignites spontaneously on contact with water, producing phosphine gas, which burns. If Greek fire contained calcium phosphide as an initiating agent, it would genuinely ignite on contact with water rather than merely resisting extinction. Calcium phosphide can be produced by heating bone ash with carbon in a furnace. A process within the technical capabilities of 7th century craftsmen who knew what they were looking for. A third theory focuses on pine resin and distilled petroleum, essentially a primitive napalm, thick and sticky and slow burning, combined with the mechanical advantage of the pressurized siphon, which would aerosolize the liquid into a fine mist that would ignite more readily and spread more effectively than a simple liquid stream. The burning on water property, in this reading, might be an exaggeration or a misperception, the burning liquid floating on the water's surface rather than the water itself burning. No single theory explains all the reported properties, and the honest answer is that we do not know. The secret was kept well enough that even with modern chemistry available to analyze the problem, the formula has not been recovered. The last uses and the disappearance. Greek fire appears in the historical record sporadically through the 12th century, deployed at intervals in Byzantine naval engagements. The last well-documented use in a Byzantine context dates to around 1200, after which the formula seems to have been lost, or at least no longer reliably reproducible. The reasons for this are not entirely clear. The most likely explanation combines several factors. The disruption of the craftsman's tradition by the Fourth Crusade and the sack of Constantinople in 1204, which destroyed much of the institutional continuity on which secret technical knowledge depends, the deaths or dispersal of the families who held the formula, and possibly the loss of specific raw materials or supply chains that the formula depended on. By the time the Ottoman Turks finally took Constantinople in 1453, Greek fire as a Byzantine weapon had been absent from the battlefield for 2.5 centuries. The Ottomans used gunpowder artillery to breach the Theodosian walls, a technology that made the siphon weapon obsolete in any case, since the range and destructive power of cannon exceeded anything a siphon could achieve. The weapon that had saved Constantinople in 678 and 718 was gone before the city fell. What replaced it? Initially gunpowder, then the full arsenal of modern chemistry, was in some respects less mysterious but no less dangerous. The napalm used in 20th century warfare shares several properties with Greek fire: it adheres to surfaces, burns at extremely high temperatures, and cannot be extinguished with water. The designers of napalm did not need to recover the Byzantine formula. They arrived at similar properties through independent chemistry. The problem Greek fire solved. How to set things on fire in ways that cannot easily be stopped, turns out to be a problem that human ingenuity returns to repeatedly, in every era, with the tools available to that era. The secret that stayed secret. What makes Greek fire historically unusual is not its military effectiveness. There have been other decisive weapons, but the completeness of its disappearance. The Byzantine Empire was not secretive about most of its technology. Its military manuals were detailed, its administrative records extensive, its intellectual culture sophisticated and well documented. The deliberate restriction of the formula to a single family, enforced by imperial authority and theological sanction, produced a result that is almost unique in the history of technology. A weapon that was used in dozens of engagements over more than 5 centuries, that was observed by thousands of people on both sides, that was actively sought by multiple sophisticated states with the resources to pursue it, and that was lost anyway. Modern military secrecy is often compared to the Greek fire model as an aspiration, the ideal of information so completely controlled that even sustained hostile intelligence efforts cannot recover it. By this standard, the Byzantine management of the formula was remarkably successful. The penalty for disclosure was enforced over generations. The restrictions on deployment ensured that even people who saw the weapon in action could not work backward to the formula with confidence. The theological framing made betrayal not just treasonous but sacrilegious. And in the end, the secret died with the empire that kept it. Or perhaps slightly before, as the empire's institutions weakened and the families who carried the knowledge dispersed. The liquid fire that burned Arab fleets in the harbor of Constantinople and saved the Byzantine Empire is gone. What remains is the accounts of people who saw it, the chemical puzzle it leaves behind, and the knowledge that a civilization once found a way to keep a secret so important that we are still, 14 centuries later, trying to work out what the secret was.